Hello friends, today we are back with the topics. The first topic would include fiscal deficit, FRBM Act, and growth imperatives related to fiscal deficits. It is part of the GS1 and GS3. In society section also you can utilize it, that how the social infrastructure etc. helps. United States resolution, United States Security Council resolution against Israel, and does it carry any teeth? It will be covered as our second topic. Third one is message and importance of Good Friday. As you know, the Good Friday that was yesterday. So we will understand what was the message and are the importance of Good Friday. It is our third topic. Fourth is threat to the Indian bustard. You see, Indian great bustard are under a constant threat, especially due to power lines. We will deal with it in section 1 and 3 of the GS. Water stress in reservoirs is our fifth topic, and that is part of the geography section in GS1. So let's start. It is the news about the fiscal deficit of our government. So this year's fiscal deficit targets seems achievable despite there is a spike in February. So what is the fiscal deficit? First of all, we tell that fiscal deficit is basically, it represents a shortfall in the government's income compared to its spending. So it is basically whatever the government earns and whatever it spends. This is basically a difference in that. So whenever there are lesser incomes and more spending, then it will be a negative fiscal deficit. It means fiscal deficit. And when the other situation, it is positive. Once the incomes are higher and the spendings are lower, then it will be a positive fiscal surplus state. So what are the benefits of fiscal deficit? In the sense that it gives an opportunity for a particular country or an economy to spend, to little overspend, so that it can actually, raise resources through debt rather than incomes. So you see, to spend, we require resources, and how those resources can be generated, one can be through income and another can be through debt. So whichever government faces the crisis where economic income sources are lesser, where the spending is higher, then the governments raise debt. For raising debt, they go to the markets, whether domestic market or international markets. When they go to the domestic market, they raise money through the Reserve Bank of India in by giving treasury bonds and all those instruments. When they raise resources through international also, it is the same setup, but then international monetary authorities also may help there. So whenever a country or government of that particular country try to raise resources from the domestic, then those resources actually which could have been utilized by the private sector are basically taken away by the government sector or the public sector. This phenomena is called crowding out of investment. Crowding out means the pie that was available for the domestic private sector was taken away by the government or by the public sector. That's why the governments actually, what they try to do is they try to raise resources of the fiscal deficit from international sources. Taking from internal sources actually does not allow or does not create a situation of crowding out where private sector also feel the pressure. But there is also a problem with the international raising of loans also, that it is subject to the fluctuations in the currency levels. As you know, whenever there is a fiscal deficit, then the inflationary measures can spike because the government actually is overspending than its income sources, and overspend sometimes can create a demand and supply mismatch. So whenever there is a demand and supply mismatch, inflation is bound to happen. And as you know, there is an inflation, so the currency value start decreasing, or whatever the currency has inner strengths, that start decreasing. So whenever there is a high depreciation in the currency, then the imports will become harder for the country, costlier, and exports will become dearer. even the interest rate that is paid in dollars, or the amount that has to be paid back in the international currency, that also get affected, because when your own currency weakens vis-a-vis other currencies, then you have to pay relatively extra amount to those governments. So there is a mix by which the domestic governments actually raise resources from the domestic sources and the international sources because of this particular region. Now, couple of statistics that why the fiscal deficit as of now and where it is standing. You must also know that why the government raised the fiscal deficit, because there is a tendency, number one, to provide people with extra avenue of not only employment but income generation facilities. According to Keynes, Keynes was a famous, influential economist in the USA. He argued that deficit spending and debts, those are incurred to sustain the spending, can help country out of the economic recession. What is economic recession? When the growth actually for 2 consecutive quarters dips. So when the growth actually dips, then after it becomes a recessionary thing. To come out of the recession, nations take the hand of deficit financing, and through that the governments actually overspend and releases money into the pockets of people, and that can be one of the way to fight economic recession. So deficit financing is a major growth driver. Now we can look about some statistics. So government's receipt and expenditure has widened sharply from about 11 lakh crore rupees in January to close to 15 lakh crore rupees this time. And the amount of deficit actually seems to be close to, there is a revised target of 17.3 lakh crore rupees, and we have hit up to 86.5% within 29 days of February. So you can write that what are the regions. So number one region is, one is the center transferring around about 2.15 lakh crore rupees to states through two installments of their fiscal, installment of their tax devolution. What is tax devolution? You must know that there is a finance commission that is in under Article 280. It's constituted to decide about the finances between state and the center. What should be the divisible pool percentage between the center and states and among states? So center time to time actually, as per finance commission, it should be 42%. So center time to time transfers this money. So this 2.15 lakh crore rupees is center giving in two installments of their tax devolution to states. This was 1.4 lakh crore rupees last year. Second reason for the higher fiscal deficit is capital expenditure has also risen to close to 84,000 crore rupees as compared to 47,000 crore rupees in January last time and this time. Why it is so? Because as you know, budgeted expenditure for infrastructural segment was, center's target was 10 lakh crore rupees earlier. Although model code of conduct definitely will halt this particular fiscal deficit spending, because of you cannot make out all those new schemes, and the expenditure also, and the administration is also busy, and that is also one of the negative thing actually about constant model code of conduct, and why the one nation one election concept is being talked about, although it's a separate matter about one nation one election, but I'm just saying about it. So as a proportion of the GDP, so what are our targets? Whenever we talk about Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act, then this act was introduced to introduce transparency. Earlier, there wasn't any transparency in how the budget are being handled or what are the fiscal deficit. So India implemented the FRBM Act, through which the transparency was said to be introduced in India's fiscal management system. The long-term objective of this was to deal with inflation also and to give stability to fiscal finances. So what are the features? Number one, there will be a medium-term fiscal policy statement that will be placed by the government. There will be macroeconomic framework statement, and there will be fiscal policy strategic statement. So these are the FRBM Act targets. Although NK Singh committee recommendation when it was committed in 2016 to suggest changes to the act, it suggested that the committee using debts as the primary target for fiscal policy and target must be achieved by 2023. The committee also proposed to create an autonomous fiscal council. So whenever you are talking about fiscal deficit or in GS3 dealing about the fiscal situation in India, you can talk about this particular committee, that is N.K. Singh committee, that was introduced in 2016, and it gave suggestions like fiscal council also. It says that we need to create an autonomous fiscal council with a chairperson and 2 members. Those are appointed by the center. So it says that borrowing also, according to the suggestion of the committee, the government must not borrow from RBI except when center has to meet temporary shortfalls and RBI subscribes to domestic securities. And why it was so? As I told you, that domestic and international, raising of the resources and crowding out that happens. So as a proportion of to our GDP, the deficit last year stood at around 6.4%. And this year, as you know, Nirmala Sitharaman talked about it being in the range of 5.8 to 5.9%. The government is committed to narrow it down to 4.5% of our GDP by 2025-2026 with a 5.1% target. As you know, FRBM Act actually talked about 3.5% of the fiscal GDP as a fiscal deficit, but because of the corona issues, the government had to spend money, and because of the income levels went down, but the supply side measures on the spendings actually were the similar. So during the corona, fiscal deficit ballooned. We were close to 10% with center and state share in the fiscal deficit. But now, as the last budget talked about it being in the range of 5.8%, the government is trying to actually keep it limited. So keeping the fiscal deficit also has its advantages, that number one, the government does not have to get so many resources through debt from either domestic market or institutional investors from international markets. Number two, the inflation also remains in the range bound territory because the fiscal deficits are not ballooned that high. Even the currency value also remains at a particular level because of there is no depreciation seen because the inflation is under control. So these are the benefits of the fiscal deficit, but the deficit also has its inner known disadvantages also. So you can mention everything like that. Now we come to second topic. What is the United States, why it has allowed UNSC resolution on Gaza ceasefire to pass? So what is the UNSC resolution? You must know that before some days, the United Nations Security Council passed a particular a resolution against Israel, and it directed Israel actually to stop the war there in Gaza. But one noteworthy thing was that United States abstained from it. United States, as you know, has been a staunch ally of Israel. Why this important also? As we know that in West Asia, the situation is like this. There are USA allies in West Asia. Those are in form of Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and even Qatar. USA does not have good relations with Iran, and that's why there is a dispute between Iran and Saudi Arabia also. There is a dispute between Iran and UAE also, and Israel and Iran are also one of the potential two adversaries. So the United Nations Security Council resolution and USA's non-use of veto is now coming as a setback for Israel. Because what the United Nations Security Council veto is trying to do is they are saying that Israel should stop war. But you must have also seen that in October 7, when Israel was attacked by Gaza militants, that time it was the United States that stood rock behind Israel. And it says that Israel has a right to defend itself. So why there is a sudden shift, or is it a shift? Because not vetoing, it does mean that you are also not helping Israel. One of the possible reason in the United States position this time is because of the voting that is scheduled to take place for presidential election in November this time. And as you know, Democrats who are in power, they are having some troubles there, and to get their voters back, Democrats actually has their vote base in left-leaning people and other people who are critical of Israel. So that is also one of the reason. And similar lines are also drawn because when Obama was in last year of his office, at that time also he took certain steps regarding this particular thing where he also did the same work as compared to this time that is being done. So it is not a new news, but yes, it is a little shift in the US actions. So one reason is the voting. Has the US allowed a United Nations Security Council resolution that is critical of the Israel to pass earlier? So, however, this is not the first time, as I told you. Obama administration in 2016, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution deeming Israel's settlement in Palestine illegal. So this is not the first time. Even in 2016, it was done because United States that time was going into polls, and it was Democrats who were doing it. So this is an important step, although, where the United Nations Security Council has passed a particular resolution, and that too when the United States has, not come out against it, although it has not supported it by remaining absent, but not using veto means that particular thing passed 14-0 rather than any kind of veto power that would have been used by the United States or one of the veto building country. Now the main question is the UN resolution binding or how it can be enforced? In general, United Nations General Assembly resolutions are in the nature of recommendations which explicate the UN membership's position on a particular matter. They talk about a particular matter and what will be the United Nations membership's position on that particular matter. They talk about it. United Nations Security Council resolutions are normally seen as somewhat more prescriptive than the United Nations General Assembly resolution. So whenever you talk about United Nations Security Council resolution, you can say that as compared to United Nations General Assembly, these are definitely more prescriptive. However, there is a difference between United Nations Security Council votes under Chapter 6 and 7 of the United Nations Charter. There is a Charter of the UN, and under that there are two sections, two chapters 6 and 7, and under these there is a difference between the chapter 6 and chapter 7 of the UN Charter, with chapter 7 being considered as binding. So whatever resolution actually those are brought, if they are brought under chapter 7, then they are binding in any particular case. But we should also remember that in any case, options for enforcing a United Nations Security Council resolutions are limited if the country refuses to accept it. So number one, under chapter 6 and 7, there is a question that we deal with United Nations Security Council resolution, whether they are applicable or not, or binding or not. Even if under chapter 7 they are binding, but United Nations Security Council, there is an option for enforcing, but that option is limited if the country in question does not accept it. As Israel also said that we will not accept the United Nations Security Council resolution. If the United Nations Security Council wants to enforce its decision, it can decide to authorize travel bans, sanctions, or other sending of the troops, none of which is going to happen in this particular case. So just this is a particular messaging to Israel, but does not have more teeth in this. So you can write about this one. Whenever how we can relate also to your answer, whenever you are writing about United Nations Security Council reforms also, that time you can also mention that yes, although United Nations Security Council passes resolution, but they do not have any teeth also. So we should make sure that the United Nations Security Council has more teeth. Yeah, there should be some mechanism by which United Nations Security Council resolutions are basically implemented or enforced. So this is the topic. Does the abstention actually signal any fundamental change in the United States position on Israel? We think it is not, because United States has earlier also done, and it is a voting season. So Israel, anyway, actually the United States may come back to its own position to, support Israel, because there are very long, Israeli association that United States has. And in West Asia, if you discount Israel and if you see West Asia through the prism of Israel, then it becomes a very, very challenging theater, because Israel is a function democracy and there is no democracy as of now that is functioning in West Asia. So it does not seem like as a setback to the Israel. And after elections, it may happen that US actually comes back on its own position in Israel. Now we talk about the fourth next topic, and that is Good Friday. So what is Good Friday? Good Friday, as you know, it was observed on March 29. And what does this do? It marks the day of Jesus Christ crucifixion. Christians believe that Jesus rose from the dead the following Sunday, which is commemorated as the joyous day of Easter. So that is the importance of this particular day. So Jesus of Nazareth, believed to have lived a humble life as a carpenter more than 2000 years ago. Judaism was the prevalent region. Judaism was a prevalent region, and the region was under the rules of Romans. So Jesus preached the message of compassion and brotherhood. You see, what are the teachings? So he always preached the message of compassion and brotherhood and criticized powerful classes for stifling the weak. So whenever we talk about the teachings of Jesus, then we should say that yes, his teaching or message was of compassion and brotherhood in the times when he also criticized the powerful classes for their stifling of the weak. He also challenged the existing social, religious, and political setup, because that time he talked about being these particular social, religious, and political setup to being exploitative that time. So it is the messaging by Jesus. According to biblical account, Jesus told his followers that one of them would betray him to the authorities. He blessed the bread and wine and referred to them as his body and blood. On the After Jesus was betrayed by his follower Judas, the authorities charged him with blasphemy and sentenced him to death by crucifixion. So this crucifixion actually is marked on this particular day. On the third day after his death, Jesus is believed to have risen from the dead in a miracle known as resurrection, which is celebrated as Easter. And you should know that this is why the Good Friday is celebrated. Why Good Friday? So there are several theories as to why the word good is associated with that particular day. So, according to Baltimore Catechism, a US Catholic school text, Good Friday is good because Christ showed his great love for the man and purchased for him every blessings. In Oxford English Dictionary, the BBC also earlier that in older terms, it was thought that the word simply designates a day on which the religious observance is held. So why there are different dates for Good Friday? So Good Friday is observed on a different date every year depending on the full moon. And the standard definition of Easter is that it is the first Sunday after the full moon that occurs on and after the spring equinox. Why we should also note the messaging of Good Friday? Because number one, India is a multicultural society. In a multicultural society, we should celebrate each culture and each religious uh, I mean good particular festivities day, whether this is Hindu or Christians or Muslims or Parsis or any other. So Sikhs and all those religions, because India is a multicultural society, we should know about each other's religious phenomena, why these particular days, etc. are followed, what is the significance of it, what is the message that is given or passed by these kind of events or days. So in a multicultural society, it is important. It is also important to pay attention to the ethical and moral moorings of these particular phenomena, because in the times of whenever we talk about it, that what, so the question can be asked in this form also: what India provides in the times of challenges where the humanity is fighting in conflicts and there are challenges of us versus them. So you can always talk about that India provides teachings in the form that being it a multicultural society, we respect each and every religion. Each and every religion also has certain dates, and India provides actually those dates as a national holiday for that particular thing. The messaging that is provided by all these religions also helps us to understand, what was the messaging that was given by these particular day. So ethical and cultural moorings also helps us into this particular phenomena. Now comes the next topic, that is power threat to the bustard. What is power threat? As you know, Indian bustard is right now under a crisis. So the crisis is these birds are definitely seeing one of their most challenging period. Less than 150 Indian bustards are now remaining in the wild. So what is driving their extinction? Supreme Court last week said that it will review its April 2021 order to bury power lines under the in the habitat of the Great Indian Bustard. As you know, that Great Indian Bustard have been falling prey to the having falling prey, and that particular region was uh, given to the power lines. Those are in the western Rajasthan, the power lines from which we actually generate powers and distribute powers. So they say that there was a particular argument that this is happening because of the power lines. So Supreme Court in April 2021 order said to bury power lines underground. The court created a 7-member committee that will suggest steps to protect and conserve the Great Indian Bustard. As we know that only less than 150 individuals of this particular large ostrich-side bird species are left in the wild. This is critically endangered. This is critically endangered species. Following the deaths of the number of birds due to collision with power lines over the years, the top court 3 years ago in 2021 ordered that overhead transmission network should be sent underground. Power lines actually pose a risk to all flying birds. In 2020, a study that was carried out by Wildlife Institute of India in 4,200 square kilometers of Great Indian Habitat and around the Desert National Park in Rajasthan estimated that power lines must have killed 84,000 birds of multiple species every year. So, in an affidavit submitted to the Supreme Court February 2024, the center said that taking lines of 66 kilowatt and higher voltages underground was not feasible for the evacuation of bulk power due to constraints such as transmission losses, maintenance challenges, multiple cable joints, increased time requirements, and concerns of safety. So this is a particular thing actually that the government of India is now taking a stand on. The cost implications is very heavy, running into thousands of crore rupees, that the center has said. The affidavit also says that harnessing renewable power from high potential areas of Rajasthan and Gujarat was also essential to meet India's rising power demand and international commitments on climate change. However, due to higher reactive compensation requirement and higher cost compared to overhead systems, underground cables are being used on a case-to-case basis. So this is the affidavit that the center is now placing or has placed before the Supreme Court. Power lines are not the only threat to Great Indian Bustard. Even free-ranging dogs have also proliferated alarmingly in this particular landscape, in the Thar landscape. In 2017, feral park accounted for a third of Chinkara depredation in DNP. So in the affidavit, the center said that government was working to save the bustard through initiatives such as captive breeding and habitat restoration and protection. Despite teething troubles, efforts at captive breeding succeeded in Jaisalmer districts. So, however, the purpose of captive breeding is to supplement the wild population, which is only possible when a sizable habitat is freed of hostile infrastructure. So, we should also buy and divert actually and spend well among the Campa fund. Those are compensatory funds for protection of forest. So now, why this is a question? This is a question because each and every time we hear about the development versus climate or development versus the environment. And this is a classic test where we are having a challenge between development and environment. Environment can only be saved when the diversity of the species is present on the planet. When there is no diversity, then those species which actually have their living or make their living by doing preying, then that preying population or the population that is preyed, if that population increases and actually in turn eats grass or herbivores etc. are in a larger quantity, then it can create trouble on our land based agriculture or grasslands. So even that increases, it creates an imbalance. So that's why to protect environment we require diversity of the species, and diversity of the species cannot actually happen through these kind of things. So there is always a tussle between developmental challenges and environmental challenges, and center's affidavit is now tilting towards the developmental needs. They are saying that shifting power lines underground will incur lot many cost, and costs are very high. So even they are saying in an affidavit that we are doing it with several other measures like habitat protection or restoration or captive breeding and using the Campa fund for other purposes. So let us see what the Supreme Court does into this matter. But this is a classic case where development and environment are actually against each other, and why the diversity of species is necessary and why the development in itself is necessary, but environment protection is even more in the times of climate change, especially in those areas like Western Rajasthan, which always face the problem of acute water distress. Now we move on to the next topic, and that is water level in more than half of India's major reservoirs being 40% or below that particular thing. So why it is important? Why the news is important? We must know that water level in more than half of India's 150 major reservoirs is lower than 40% of their capacity. And with the storage in two-thirds being less than 50%. The depleting water level, why is the reason? So number one, whenever you are asked that recently, in geography also you will ask that recently there was a news about water shortages in major reservoirs of India. What do you see that are the reasons behind it and how it can impact the geography? So you can say that yes, first of all you will tell that this is the data that according to Central Water Commission, close to 40% of close to 150 major reservoirs have lower than 40% of their capacity, with the storage in two-thirds being less than 50%. So this is one of the data. The reasons you can mention is number one, patchy rainfall due to El Nino, leading to drought and a prolonged dry spell in Asia amid the warming of the Pacific Ocean. You must know that during the time of El Nino, there is an unusual warming of the Pacific Ocean, and because of the low pressure created in those areas, the rain winds actually move away from Indian Ocean towards those Middle Pacific territories near about the coast of South Africa and North Africa, and it rains more there, affecting rains actually in this particular area. So there was an acute rainfall shortage in the Asia and around. At least 60% of the country, including 53% in March alone, has witnessed rain deficiency. So you can write down number one, El Nino, number two, the rain deficiency that is attached with it, and it is in close to 60% of the of our geography, including nearly 53% in March alone. And because of this rain deficiency or no rainfall since January, this is also the problem is getting more even acute. The country has received 1% above rainfall of 20 since March this time. So during the post-monsoon period of October 2023, more than 50% of regions in the country were rain deficient. And this is one of the biggest reason that how El Nino, whenever you are even dealing with El Nino and what is El Nino and how it affects the region's geography, you can write down about El Nino. And even you can actually mention that economic impact of El Nino is so higher that the regions those are rich in agriculture etc., they face their own problems. For irrigation, for industry, we face water acute shortages. So industry either tries to move into those areas which are water surplus or water, at least there is no problem of water. So even there is a shift that is caused by this. So there is a greater economic threat. The available water this week in these reservoirs was close to 67,591 billion cubic meters. So water reserves are lower since March 2019, when reservoir capacity fell to 35%, and so southern cities such as Chennai run out of water. Number third reason also you can say that why India's major reservoirs is also below. Number four, you can also mention the regular dam constructions. So the dam construction that happen to generate hydroelectricity or for other irrigation purposes, they also block the water, and the water actually does not come into these particular reservoirs because of that particular thing. But it is a perennial issue. Now it is an issue that India has to deal with or any other country has to deal with. But El Nino and rain deficiency attached to El Nino are the immediate reasons for this particular issue. In case the rainfall is deficient in the upcoming months, hydropower generation. Now, what will be the effects of it? So, the hydropower generation can get affected if the rainfall deficit situation also remains lower. And when there is a shortfall in the electricity hydropower generation, then the regions in the southern or central cities may face the electricity crisis. And when there is an electricity shortage, it can affect your agriculture, it can affect industry and even the population at large. And as you know, this time the summer temperatures are said to be above normal, so in the summer months it will become even harder and challenging to deal with these kind of issues. So that can be one of the effect. On the assumption of normal rainfall and it is spread over space and time across the country during June to September, Indian agriculture gross value addition is expected to grow around 3%. But in case there is a rain deficiency, then the growth rate can decline and India's overall GDP also can be challenged because of this reason. As you know, during the time of COVID, it was agriculture which played a major role to uplift the agriculture from deep slumbers. So that's why in GS1 we mentioned that, what are the effects of it and what are the reasons of it. So we stop the lecture here. If you feel that it was able to provide you good insight, please like and share it so more people can watch. For more such videos, you can like the button and subscribe the channel. Thank you.